Hey guys, welcome to a quick interview. I'm here with a PiG from Australia, Australian Zergplayer, and he posted recently in a thread on Team Liquid that was dealing with, once again, the question, why are foreigners lacking a little bit against Koreans in competitions? Is it an infrastructure problem? Are foreigners just too lazy? And what are the reasons for it? And PiG, you actually talked about a couple of really good points and tried to get a discussion going. Can you just sum up what exactly made you engage in the thread and what your points are?
Yeah, well, I tend to get a bit, I guess, worked up when I see threads where people start just kind of foreigner bashing or bashing players because they often don't know how much effort the players put in. But more importantly, they don't. People start throwing around information as if it's factual when it's usually not, saying they're lazy or this or that. And so I really wanted to kind of jump in and clarify because there's a lot of people who seem to think that foreigners get paid more, they have better conditions, and so on. I really wanted to get in there and kind of point out that there is less money in the foreign scene, and most importantly, there's a less healthy kind of structure for bringing up new players. So as a result, you've overall got less players that are actually kind of having their living costs covered. You've got less players rising up. And obviously, as a result of that and the lack of the team house infrastructure, you're going to have players not performing at the same level. And it's not just a matter of these players being lazy. So I really wanted to clarify that.
So one of the things that people will immediately jump upon is trying to call you out for that you say that there's less money in the foreign scene than compared to Korea. Because one of the things that we know about Korea is that there are a lot of really good players that travel maybe every now and then to a foreign tournament because the tournament organizer is able to pay that flight or because someone sponsors them. They perform really well, they are on a really high level, but within Korea there's just no money for them to pay them a salary. So that's what always is on the forums, that the salaries that are given to Korean players are so low in comparison to Europeans. So how does that work with you just saying that you feel there's less money in the foreign scene compared to Korea?
I think the big thing is really living costs. I think if you put aside the infrastructure and the history of brood war and training and all that sort of stuff and it being more widely publicized, you've got people from a young age basically going into a team house where they've got their living costs covered. Food, electricity, all that sort of stuff, your transport to and from events in Seoul. It makes life very easy. And that's actually a huge expense. I think a lot of people don't realize, I guess, how many Korean pro gamers there are. If you look at the number of team houses, Azubu, Startail, MVP, and so on and so forth, and then the 8 Kesper teams, you actually end up with something like, I don't know, 150, 120 Korean pro gamers living in houses. You'd actually have a better idea than me.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. Like, there are quite a lot. So when you're talking about like the living costs and everything and about the payment itself, like you're talking a little bit more about the base of players, because right? Because I feel that when you look at the big teams that we have in the foreign scene, let's just name EG and maybe Team Liquid being two of them, there is actually like a huge amount that the players on the top level are being paid. Of course, not only for the results, it's also a thing about being marketable, something where Koreans were always a little bit lacking. But I feel that you're not really talking about the top foreign players, but are more focusing a little bit more on the base and where all the new players come from, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think I'll probably talk about it a little bit later about why that's important for fostering talent and that sort of thing. But just overall, if you just add it up, you've got this big player base who basically have enough income or enough kind of the housing, the food paid for, that their lives are covered, their lifestyle is covered. When you look at foreign pro gamers, it's actually only a very niche number at the top that are in the EGs or the Team Liquids. And, there are other teams, there are other countries, France as well, Millennium is a very, well-off team. And all these players, sure, they've got enough money coming in to actually pay their way and to survive. The majority of other pro gamers, though, outside of them, I would say that number is probably at most 50 pro gamers who earn enough to live off in the foreign scene. It might be a little bit more than that, but I doubt it. I'd say the rest of them are living with their parents at home. They're often either in school, in university. They basically rely on a support system outside of eSports. So as a result of that, they're not spending as much time practicing, or they're often dealing with like parents being kind of like, why are you spending so much time on your computer, not understanding. Or they work part-time jobs. So as a result, you end up with about 30, 50 players in the foreign scene who are actually kind of having this full-time esports lifestyle properly supported and covered. Whereas in Korea, you have a much larger portion of people that are kind of experiencing the full-on esports lifestyle.
So you feel because of the infrastructure that we have in Korea, with those team houses already being established, it's much easier for a new player that comes into the scene to actually make a commitment to esports and being a pro gamer, and then getting the chance to actually fulfill that dream. Whereas when you're in the foreign scene, the barrier that you have is so much higher that it's really difficult for them to get that going.
Yeah, absolutely. But, and sorry, continue.
Okay, so if you feel that's right, then at the same time, one of the counter arguments would immediately be that within the foreign scene, you have a lot more opportunities to have like a breakout performance. You have a lot more tournaments, not only on an offline segment, but also when you look at the online tournaments that you have, that sometimes have a huge prize pool. Whereas in Korea, you are kind of focused on WCS right now. So if you lose that qualifier, you have to wait for another couple of months before you can actually like even dream of getting into the Challenger League and get your name out there. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's something which is really great, but a lot of the time the online tournaments and these smaller tournaments, and there are, in lots of cities around the world have their own kind of small local scene where it's like, hey, we've got a $3,000 tournament or a $5,000 tournament. But I think it's normally the players that are already at the top of the foreign scene that are picking up those online tournaments that are making, you know, the big name for themselves. They're just kind of building on their own situation. Whereas the players kind of at the bottom, they don't get as much benefit from those opportunities because they're very rarely going to win one of these big tournaments. I think the really important thing is support while you work your skill up. And I think it's something which esports generally in the Western scene hasn't been used to, because I don't think there's been a game before StarCraft that's taken so long for you to improve at. And there's such a broad skill set involved. There's so much knowledge that goes into it and learning and steadily analyzing your games that it takes a long, long time to match these guys that have been doing it for years. So having the opportunity to play on online tournaments, it's a great competitive outlet and it is useful. And I mean, the lack of having these kind of regular competitions is an issue for the Korean scene. But when it comes down to it, I think they go back to their team house at the end of failing or making it in those qualifiers, and they've got this fantastic support system, and it gives them motivation to keep on practicing and playing. Whereas for a foreign player who keeps getting knocked out in the round of 16 in an online tournament, it can be a lot more daunting learning how to get over that. Now, not to say they can't. A lot of players can still improve themselves and work hard, but there's just less support for them to do it. As a result, you get less people choosing to invest full-time, you know, into trying to make a career in esports. I feel like there's more of a set path in Korea. If you see, you've got to go to your tryouts. The teams have regular tryouts whenever they're picking up new players, and you really try to make a name for yourselves in that way. Or you go to Courage for the Kesper teams. So I feel like it's definitely a stronger support system.
Do you feel that this is one of the main reasons why we see in North America, or in America in general right now at WCS, Koreans being so successful? Because they come from a much better infrastructure, especially now, of course, since we have the Kesper teams coming over to StarCraft 2, the Kesper teams not really being able to participate in WCS America or WCS Europe because of Pro League and their commitment just to Kesper in general and to Korea. It seems like a lot of the ESF players that already have the contacts in foreign scenes are using their contacts to just go to WCS Europe and North America. And they now have the infrastructure also that backs them up, which you kind of raised already. Do you feel like that shifting is why they are so successful in the WCS systems outside of Korea?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we've all known Korea is the place to go. Naniwar and a few other players always say, if you want to be the best, you've got to go train in Korea. So I think it's kind of a long-established fact that that's the best environment. And so, yes, they come over and that they are stronger players. And it's kind of been creating a weird problem in esports for a long time now, where there have been Koreans dominating all the big Grand Slam tournaments. So whilst we look at all these opportunities in the foreign scene, we see that often it's the top foreigners, these top guys getting the salaries that we really look up to, who are placing in that top kind of 16 to 24th bracket in that range. And the Koreans are taking the most of the top 8 or 16, especially at MLG tournaments, for instance. So for the up-and-coming players, for them to make it to the round of 32 is actually great, but they get almost zero attention for that. They get very little exposure, and as a result, it doesn't really help them that much. So it's kind of exporting the Korean skill into the foreign scene, and they dominate as a result.
What would you say, like, when we now have more team houses coming up? We have a team house for EG, we have now a team house that is being established by Root Gaming. Would you say that with the team houses that we have in America and in Europe, we will see the players just performing on a higher level in the future and then also being able to compete with the Koreans? Or is there a problem with foreigners? Like, let's just throw it out there what people write on the forums, the assumption that foreigners are just too lazy in comparison to Koreans. Do you think that that is really an issue or motivation and dedication to the game? Or do you feel that with that infrastructure now slowly being built up, we will see a rise in skill in America and Europe?
I think it's so hard to talk about, are the foreigners lazy or not. I think I don't know. I don't sit there watching someone practice. I know I've had weeks where I don't get that much done, even though I'm playing a lot of games. I don't progress much because I've got a mental block over an issue or something like that. I think having a team house is fantastic, though. I think a really important thing is having the connection to the Korean server or the European server really, really good. In Europe, obviously, the ping is going to be too high. But you've got a good competitive ladder in Europe. In North America, the ladder is not particularly competitive. As a result, I think it's really important that they have good connections to Korea. I know that the Clarity House has a really good connection to the Korean server, so all the players in there practice on the Korean ladder all day. And I think if they're in there and they're talking to each other and they're starting to work on strats, I think that really is the foundation for really, really great growth. Looking at the EG house, I don't think that's being used so much as a training facility for a big number of players, because the EG players are all flying around so much, and they also don't have a connection to the Korean server. So it's not an ideal training environment from what I've heard in the EG lab. But if the Root House opens up and a few others do, I think it is going to start moving in the right direction. But it's going to take a lot of time, and that's something which people need to accept. Yeah.
Do you think that in a team house, like from a sports perspective, like no matter what competitive sports you engage in, you will always have people being like very adamant about having a training schedule. And I feel that in esports, this is sometimes becoming a little bit of a problem, especially since you have so many tournaments that happen in different time zones. It is very difficult to actually keep to a schedule, to wake up at the same time every single day, go to bed at the same time every single day, have your training hours like at certain times so that you get that routine and where you improve. And in sports, that's usually what we always see. But sports is always offline, so you don't really have to deal with time zones unless you fly to an event on a different continent. Do you feel that this is a special problem in esports that is really leaving a huge impact, or do you think that players can actually work around that?
I think players can work around it, absolutely, but it's a learning process, and I think the less disciplined players, or the players who don't have a direct kind of coach or mentor figure, they're going to struggle with it, especially the younger players. I mean, over my time in esports, I've learned from a lot of the more experienced guys, and a lot of the time, they'll get an opportunity to go to this tournament, like back-to-back weeks, jetting all over the globe, and they'll just say, no, I want to just do that one tournament rather than go to like MLG, DreamHack, this other big tournament, because they know there's no point. Because if you are dealing with jet lag, different time zones and everything, you just can't get proper practice in. So there definitely has to be a lot of discipline and kind of prioritizing exactly which tournaments you want to play in, and only playing in a select few so that you can put in the best performance.
If you personally would lead a team house now, what would your focus be? Because people were always talking about coaches, and I feel there's also this misconception that every time you have a Korean team house, there are in every team house amazing coaches that boil down strategies to the last second for you, which is absolutely not true. There are team houses that have good coaches, but in a lot of team houses, I feel there lacks some kind of management, where you really have someone who tells players to sit down and really practice. So if you would run a team house right now, would your focus be on a more talented player that might not have to put in that much time but might disturb others because he is just doing other things? Or would you focus on players that might have a little bit less skill but have the dedication and also the eagerness to just sit down and have a regular schedule so that everyone gets motivated by each other?
I definitely go for the dedicated players. I know a lot of people, when I've talked to people who are picking up a new team or they want to recruit some new players, they're always looking for someone who's kind of already made a name for themselves. And I think that's a problem which the foreign scene often makes. And I guess it's just because we're not used to having as much money running through, as many tournaments. Obviously, esports exploded in the last few years. In Korea, you see a lot of no-name players getting picked up by teams after they work hard at tryouts and kind of talking to the players, and they just kind of keep coming to the Code A qualifiers and trying to work really hard to get into that team. And once they show that dedication, they are sometimes given a chance. I definitely focus on players like that because ultimately StarCraft is going to be so reliant on your ability to get so angry at the game because you're so passionate and then turn that passion into actually fixing your problems. Like, you've got to be able to go from punching a wall 1 second to turning around and actually saying, what can I do better? And if they're too stubborn or arrogant to do that, I don't think there's point in investing in them as a player. So
you basically want everyone to pull a QXC. Type GG, being really mad and then destroy a keyboard.
Exactly.
So that's the kind of passion you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah, man. I mean, on that note, actually, I could tell a little story just about team houses. It's really important not just to have the coach. Like, a lot of people think you need a full-time kind of paid coach who's looking over your shoulder telling you what to do. When I stayed with the Prime team, they didn't have anyone like that. But it didn't matter because they all help each other. And what's important is always to just have people who you trust, who you can talk to and ask when you have problems. Me personally, I sometimes just ask my girlfriend. She's in Silver or Gold League. She still can pick up on basic patterns because she understands how I think about the game, and she gives me great feedback. Likewise, when you've got a really good training house environment, you don't necessarily need a coach figure as long as you've got some discipline in the house. I remember when I was practicing with Creator for, it was like GSL round of 16, he had to play Jongre-gu. And I won the first 3 games in a row. It was the first time I'd practiced with him. And I was shocked because I was such a worse player than him. And the Creator just said, he tapped me on the shoulder and said, let's take a break and then we'll play more. And he got like 2 of the other guys to come over and they watched the replays for like 15 minutes. And then we played again and he beat me like 4 games in a row. And I think about that experience and I compare it to me at home when I lose 3 games in a row to someone and I don't know what to do, and how long it takes me to kind of process that loss, watch the replays and figure out what's going on. Often there's just some very simple things in the game which you don't consider because stylistically you don't play that way. You've got a teammate with you in the house, they can often just point at it and you're like, oh, that's all I've got to do. And bam, you progress 10 times the speed.
Yeah, really good point actually. What you just talked about, like the point with the team house, is definitely like an issue with the discipline and a coach being available. The one thing that actually was always a little bit annoying to me was when we were at the GOM house in Korea, that there was not really a lot of discipline there. So what GOM kind of had in mind was that the players were just they were capable of actually like motivating themselves and barreling down and just like playing the entire time, and we always had like a few players there, a few persons that didn't really practice on a regular schedule or not the entire day. And then when you have like the first guy sitting there and watching a movie and the second guy doing something else, the players that really want to sit down and want to practice oftentimes have a little bit of a problem really motivating themselves. So the example that you just brought up with the Prime players just helping each other out and going through the replays together is actually a really good one. I feel that especially in the foreign scene, we sometimes lack a little bit players helping against each other. We seem to have a lot of drama going on and certain players not liking others, and that there's not a lot of help. Xenocider just had an interview after MLG where he was talking a little bit about being the cleaning lady of the EG team, and that for him it's not that easy to actually get practice and other players to help him out, which is not trying to say anything bad about the EG players. They have enough to do with all the sponsorships and all the clips, all the attention that they get these days. But it just shows in general that there's a sentiment that's also like being echoed by players within the foreign scene, that they have problems training with others. Do you feel that as well? Is that something that you experienced in the past, that it's difficult for you to find training partners within the foreign scene that can help you prepare for a tournament or a specific game?
Yeah, I think it's very fragmented, the scene, in terms of, because we are all spread out so far. I think a big step for me a long time ago was starting to talk to a lot more players from America and from Europe, and actually networking with them, making friends with these people. Like, I think a lot of players have issues though, because whether they're just very introverted, they're not, or they want to play the game, they want to practice, you know. They don't realize that maybe just adding people on Skype, being nice to people on ladder and being like, can you practice with me, and getting to know people. That's actually just as important for us in the foreign scene, because you need to build your network of training partners for you to kind of progress up the ladder, because you're only ever going to be as good as the practice you're getting. So if you're not kind of working up in that way, then it can be a problem. I know it's especially a problem for scenes that are very insular. So what I mean by that is a scene where the same players are playing each other over and over again in the tournaments. For instance, down here in Australia, also in Germany, I know where they have EPS, the kind of top players don't really want to practice with each other because they're constantly playing tournaments. They're kind of the money, which is the easiest for them to win, is against these players who they're also the best friends with. So they don't end up wanting to share their builds. And often a team, you only have one or two other players on a similar skill level to you within that team structure. So I think networking is actually quite important as a foreign player, or you're just not going to get the same practice.
One of the things that we have in Korea, especially for the Casper teams, is there are a lot of B teamers within the team that just act as training partners. So that's the only purpose that they have. And that also helps them, of course, because they get to play against some of the best players. They get to improve really fast. And when they are like improving rapidly, that's also being recognized. So then they get their chance at some point. Is it, for example, when you're playing on ladder, does it happen to you occasionally that you play against a no-name guy and you feel like, okay, this guy was actually like really good, I don't know what to do against that build, I struggled here. Do you contact like random players where you feel, okay, that guy played really well and I want to play a couple of games against them? Is that one like way how a player that isn't really known and isn't really on a big team has a chance to actually get in contact with better players and then maybe at some point get a shot?
I think that's one way. Most of the time I practice on Korea, so I don't really try anything more these days. Sometimes I do play a barcode, and I think that's got to be Flash or Innovation or something, because I get owned so hard. But I've recently started asking people a lot more for advice, because I would say just this year I've kind of hit a level with my own training where I've become very, very disciplined, and I train a lot. And I've got the support system now, I would say, from my team to be able to focus almost purely on the game. But there's still times where I hit a wall. But I guess because I'm so disciplined now, rather than just trying to bang my head against that wall, I'm very quickly now trying to seek out people, other pro gamers, and just kind of sending them replays or being like, look, man, can you watch some replays with me? It's usually not the players that I play against anymore. It used to be I'd message people on ladder, I'd be like, you just owned me, what should I do differently? If I was playing like De Muslim or Idra or someone, these famous pros, I'd be like, oh, what went wrong there? And sometimes you get feedback, sometimes they'll give you some advice, sometimes they'll play some games with you, sometimes they won't. But it's definitely necessary to try, kind of put your feelers out there. And I think something great which the community is doing, or I guess some of the teams, is the academies. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure exactly how they're being run. For some teams, maybe they're not really getting that much training out of it, but ones which are very organized, like the Clarity Academy, which got announced not long ago, they seem to be doing a really good job. Even though esports in the foreign scene is so spread out, where across these vast distances, we're not all in Seoul like it is for the Korean scene. Yep. You can still start offering these players. Maybe they're not worth money because there's not that much money for the lower league players in the foreign scene. But you can still say, look, you can be part of this academy team, and we can train together. We can start kind of teaching you how to market yourself a little bit. Look, make yourself a Twitter account, and this way you've got kind of this pool of players around your own level, and from there you can kind of play with the A-team players. And I think those sort of things are really, really great for starting to build up the networks for these players, so that it isn't just left to the players who take the initiative upon themselves, so that the players who are more introverted or not as good at figuring out this stuff on their own, if they've got talent, they can still develop in the scene.
You just mentioned the academies as being like one of the things that you can do, or like a great way for a player that doesn't really have a name yet to slowly get into esports and then maybe get his shot. But academy spots are pretty limited, so to a player within the foreign scene that doesn't get one of those spots, what would you personally think is the best way for them to actually get their name out there and getting recognized and being successful?
I would say definitely just playing and as well as you can. Obviously, doing well at a tournament is the best thing you can do. But it's hard because I'm not exactly an esports veteran. I've been around for a few years now. But for me personally, I spent a lot of time kind of just streaming. I actually coached players as a part-time job. That's kind of what I started doing. When I first started devoting myself to StarCraft because I was just in love with the game, I actually was coaching players full-time. And that was all I was doing. I was just kind of practicing a little bit on the side. So for me, it's kind of been a very slow path to the full-time, focused only on practicing as seriously as possible pro gamer. I think if people have a support system where they are able to focus purely on the game, they should focus just on that. Just practice as much as you can. Do create a Twitter and maybe stream a little bit every now and then. Most importantly, constantly seek out better practice partners. So if you run into the pros on ladder, ask them advice, talk to them, try to make friends with them and make practice partners, and steadily work your way up and kind of just be involved in the scene so that people will know who you are, and from there you can start getting more support. And I don't think getting picked up by a team is always that important. I think it's just getting the practice with the right players, and then once you do get that breakout performance, that's when you will start getting a lot of support from sponsorships.
We talked a little bit about how much money is involved in the foreign scene, and that there is, like, let's say 30 to 50 players that really make a living off that money. Do you feel the discrepancy between the top players within the world or within the foreign scene and then those players that are in academies, that it's too high, that this is one of the problems that newer players have to actually make that jump from being a part-time gamer to really dedicating their life to esports?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I think which also gives people the idea that there is, so much money in the foreign scene, and why a lot of Korean players, there was kind of that rumor going around that if you joined a foreign team, you'd instantly be rich for a while. It all comes from the fact that, yes, there's this huge scaling where the players at the very top are doing very well for themselves in the foreign scene, but, that's probably only 10 or 15 players who are actually getting these high numbers that we see quoted in these articles on websites all the time. And I think from there it starts to drop down very, very suddenly and very quickly. So there is a huge discrepancy, I would say, with the distribution of wealth in esports. It's partly because the events as well. I mean, that's a whole other discussion, I guess, is, having just kind of regular ways to show off your players. Because at the moment it relies on you being right in the center of everyone's eye through either streaming, being a real personality in everyone's eye, or winning tournaments. There isn't the kind of slow and steady, constant weekly thing going on until the WCS was formed. So hopefully there'll start being kind of more interviews and showing the player's personality through those tournaments, so that even if the player is only of a mediocre level, they're still worth more to sponsors and to teams. And that way you can start investing in the middle layer of players and eventually the lower level of players as well.
Coming a little bit back to the original topic where we started, we were talking a lot now about the foreign scene, about the infrastructure in Korea, the infrastructure in America and Europe, the chances of newer players in Korea, what they can do, like that there are a lot of teams, that there is support for them, whereas it's a little bit more lacking in America and Europe. But originally we started off with the statement that is being discussed over and over again, where people say foreigners are worse than Koreans because they just don't practice as much and they don't dedicate as much time to it. So now I've been talking about some of the reasons why exactly it's so difficult for foreigners actually to make that commitment, and why it's so hard to make that leap from being a part-time player that is maybe finishing school right now and finish the school and now has to make the decision, do I go into pro gaming and try that for a while, or do I go to university, which is much more stable. But let's talk a bit about the players that actually are already on that level, because I feel like on the highest level in the foreign scene, because I feel like a lot of the discussions on Reddit and Team Liquid focus a lot on those when people post those statements. So you immediately picked up on it and said, like, okay, this is not the whole story. There are a lot of other things that you have to discuss, and I think we covered like most of those points. From the players that are at the top, would you expect better results? Would you expect them to be able to compete with the Koreans? Or do you say the disadvantage of not having that infrastructure, even though they can pay for a living with their salaries, that the disadvantage is huge enough that it explains why Koreans are still dominating as much as they do?
I think it's dangerous to ever start looking at the players. I
mean, we're generalizing, of course.
More from them, but yeah. Generally speaking, it's something where I guess you can still compete with the Korean players, and I don't think they are as far ahead as everyone thinks. And I think there should be hopefully an expectation that more of these players at the very top level are competing, getting performances, say, to the likes of Naniwa, or there's a few other players such as Snoot who've been regularly, doing these really deep runs, taking out multiple Korean players. I do think we should expect more of them, but at the same time, I don't think we should be posting across forums saying, "Oh, they're lazy." This guy just streams when he's got so much talent.
Well,
he should be practicing.
Funny as it is, you actually picked out those players that are currently in Korea.
I did, didn't I? Without even thinking about it. Well, there are some other really talented players out there like Demaga.
But that shows exactly the dedication that you would want as like a foreign fan from the players that you cheer for, to like go to Korea or go to a region where it's as tough as possible so that you get the practice that you need. Do you feel that more foreign players should do that, even though now we have the WCS system, or can they even improve to the level to beat the Koreans right now when they stay in the US or in Europe?
I think they can, absolutely. I think one issue may be not being able to practice on the Korean ladder, and so that's harder. But at the same time, I think players have shown, such as Demago recently and a few other players, that you can still play exceptionally well outside. But it does take kind of an extra level of determination in terms of what I was talking about before, where if you hit a brick wall, you need to be very proactive about finding a way around it. You need to be really, really motivated constantly. And so I think it does take more effort to get to the same level outside of Korea, but I think it's definitely possible, especially if you've got a connection to their ladder. I think, though, when people start saying, are they're being lazy, we expect more, you should be bothered to go here and there, I think it makes less sense to move to Korea with the WCS system now. I think it made more sense in the previous years, with players like Huck living over there for 2 or 3 years. I think, though, now we kind of look at it all, and everyone's like, why aren't they more moving over there, or why aren't more practicing hard in the European or North American scene?
Just one thing, actually I want to just throw in one thought, because I actually had a couple of players contacting me and asking me if I could help out with them getting a spot, in one of the team houses, and one of the huge problems is that currently for them it's really difficult to stay anywhere. A lot of the team houses don't want to have foreign players right now, especially not foreign players that don't have a lot of exposure, but they are a little bit reluctant to have other players invading their territory, or they or for other reasons, they can't have someone there. The team house is being full, for example. So right now it's actually that comes as an addition for a few players that are already in houses that are connected. I mean, we all know that Alliance is kind of affiliated with EG, so Naniwa being at the EG house now, you have Snoot with EGTL. So these are all things where the players have the chance, but a lot of the foreign players that actually contact me where I'm trying to find a team house for them, they can't really get in anywhere because the team house is either full, or the players or the teams are reluctant to take on a player for a long time that they might not even know.
Yeah, well, that's actually interesting, and that's another obstacle. But I think that actually sucks for those players, and I was really lucky to be able to stay with the Prime team last year, because it is a really valuable learning experience, even just being there for a month and a half. But I think ultimately, if we want to look at the foreign scene, and something I'm really passionate about is eSports, building it up outside in the foreign scene everywhere and locally, and I think we need to look more at the kind of motivating the lower players and giving them more support. And actually bringing new blood into the scene, because an issue is if people honestly are convinced that this player X, who is getting however much huge salary and he never really performs well in tournaments or doesn't perform to the level they expect for how much he's getting paid, rather than asking why aren't they practicing harder and why are they spending their days streaming, you should be asking the question, why isn't there a younger player trying harder who's being able to replace him? And I think the reason is often that there isn't support for that player. And so they might try for even a whole year to get up to this level as a pro gamer. And they kind of, at the end of it, are still getting next to no support from their team, or they haven't even found a team that's willing to pick them up. And as a result, I think if you're not nurturing this new blood and bringing it up, you will get some minority of players at the top who do get lazy or focus more on marketing themselves rather than competing in tournaments at the highest level.
Yeah, what you also just mentioned, the streaming aspect, that's one of the things where I don't want to say Koreans have an advantage there, because I feel like Koreans have a huge problem with marketability. Their English is usually really poor, and results are not everything. Back in Brood War, results were everything that you needed to achieve, but a lot of Korean teams have a little bit of a problem understanding that on top of having results and performing well, you also need to be marketable. So you need to be someone who is a little bit more outgoing than the average Korean, who is usually more introverted. Good English helps you quite a lot. I mean, look at players like Polt, for example, or AMC. They have good English. They travel abroad a lot, and they are trying to just get their name out there. But the Koreans don't really do that all too much, and that's definitely a bit of an issue for them. And one of the things where that really comes into play is that if you are in one of the big foreign teams, what exposure also means and what this marketability means is that their team expects you to stream as well. So usually when you get like one of the contracts in the bigger teams within Europe or within America, you have in your contract that you have to stream a certain amount of hours per month, and usually you get incentives to even stream beyond that, because that's the best exposure that the sponsor gets out there. So there's this dance that you have to do between like focusing solely on practice and performance, and also like making sure that the company that pays your salary in the end gets the exposure that they need to actually justify that investment that they make into esports. I feel like Koreans have, I mean, it sucks for them that they don't really have those big sponsors, but at the same time, currently they practice. You can make that argument that they focus a little bit more on that practice aspect and the performance aspect, and not really having the problem, first world problem, you could argue, of pleasing a sponsor. Yeah. It's a little bit difficult. I mean, it's a little bit difficult to talk about, because, of course, for the Koreans, it would also be better to have those sponsors on like a personal level, let's say, to actually get more money out there. But this is one of the reasons why they can actually not stream. Interviews with Jagchi, with other players, it's always like, I don't want to stream right now because I feel like players are going to copy my build. But they can actually do that. Whereas in a foreign scene, if you have a big tournament coming up, the sponsor usually understands if you don't meet the requirement for the certain month. But in general, you have an obligation, or a lot of players, not all of them, but a lot of players have the obligation to actually stream, and that puts their builds out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean that's something where I personally think streaming before a tournament is really, really bad for your practice. I think it's horrible. You're never going to be as focused because you can't show your best builds. You can't do anything too sneaky or too special, because otherwise it's out there. And I think it's something where they're able to do that. It is a little bit more results oriented, which is great, but at the same time there is the problem with them not being as marketable, and the fact that they are still catering to a Western audience. Whilst StarCraft 2, not to say it's dead in Korea or anything like that, but a big part of GOM TV is the Western audience, because you've got the whole world watching. It is the global StarCraft League, and it's very globally oriented. And as a result, it does kind of create this weird issue where you're kind of exporting Korean talent all around the world to play in these tournaments. And a lot of the time, it creates that weird imbalance where all they need is results in their own scene. But when they come to foreign tournaments, because they're not as marketable and because it is a quick weekend event, people might remember the foreigner's face a lot better. The top placing foreigner is always this huge amount of exposure to do with it, even if they're not the most talkative or smiling person, just because they speak fluent English in their interviews, people relate to them a lot better.
And of course, you have still the great storyline with having the almighty Korea up there, the unbeatable warriors, and then there comes the foreigner who suddenly takes out all of them and wins the tournament. That's like the best thing that a tournament organizer can hope for, I guess.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, we talked actually about a lot of points. It's a very difficult topic, so I don't think that we can cover everything here. Is there anything else where you feel that we need to talk about at this point, or do you feel that we covered most of the points that you were trying to make?
I think we covered it pretty well. I mean, my main idea originally with posting in the thread was because I just feel there's a lot of misinformation out there, or a lack of information, more importantly. And I think in the past, esports has often grown off kind of false hype. I mean, that there's been true hype as well, but there's also been people who are kind of overeager to get their brand out there or their tournament, or they kind of overhype things and try to make out like it's bigger than it is. And sometimes I think nowadays, people see all this hype, and then they hear that it's so much bigger than it was a few years ago. And sometimes they do assume that there's an inflated amount of money in it, or that, if you're a pro gamer, even if you're on a mid-tier American team, you're still getting $20,000 a year salary. Someone brand new to the scene might think that. And of course, once you're heavily involved in the scene, you realize it's not like that at all. You know, there's not that much support for the mid and low level guys. As a result, there's not as much fresh blood. And as a result, we do have a relatively small top base of guys who are really living the esports life. They don't get the same infrastructure. So, yeah, I think I just wanted to really try to explain why that's the case. So, yeah, I think we did a pretty good job. Yeah.
Okay, then thank you very much for talking to me about those things. And yeah, that's it for now. So thank you very much again, Pig, and talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for doing the video, man. Cheers.